The Seder is a ceremony that looks backwards, and it is also a ceremony that looks to the future. And we see this at the very, very beginning of the telling of the story of the Maggid section of the Seder, where we preface the whole section with the declaration of Halach Ma'anya, okay, which concludes with a really shocking, kind of radical declaration, Hashta Avdei L'Shana Haba B'nei Chorin. We say in Aramaic, in the language of our Babylonian exile, this year we are slaves and next year we will be free. So the Seder, the celebration of freedom, actually begins with a declaration that we're not yet free, which means that the freedom that we celebrate at the Seder is not our current freedom, it's the potential for our future freedom. Okay, and so Avadim Hayim Lefarabim Mitzrayim Yitzienu Hashem Elokeinu Misham. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and God took us out of there. That's not quite what the Seder is about. It's not about looking to the past. It's not only about looking to the past. It's about seeing in that past redemption an example, proof of concept that human redemption and human freedom is possible, and that God can redeem us just as our ancestors were redeemed. And the Halach Ma'anya really sets the stage for that, okay? That you can imagine, right, in Babylonian exile, when we were no longer free, where we were no longer in our own land, that the relevance of the Seder then becomes looking to the past, not as an achievement to celebrate, but as a model that we know that since our status has changed before, it can change again. Looking back to the Mishnah as the Seder is described in that earliest text of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, of the oral Torah, the Mishnah tells us that the Maggid section, the storytelling part of the Seder, is done by being Doresh Mi Oved Avi, that we are engaged in drasha, we engage in rabbinic explication of the verses beginning at Arami Oved Avi, the verses in Deuteronomy 26 that very, very succinctly summarize Jewish history. And that's really notable on many, many levels, and there's a lot to be said about that, how we don't just read the first 12 or 13 chapters of the book of Exodus at the Seder, but we don't passively receive a story already written out, but we engage in drasha, we engage in rabbinic explication, that active midrash, that active rabbinic study with questions and answers in which terse verses are expanded to provide much more information. And we do that from these 4 verses in Arami Oved Avi that hopefully we know from the Seder, you all know from the Seder. My father was a Aramean fugitive who went down to Egypt, and from there the story is told through that method of midrash. But the Mishnah says we are dorish Arami Oved Avi ad shigmor kol parsha kula, until that entire section of the Torah is finished. And we don't do that at the Seder. We only explicate those first 4 verses beginning at Arami Oved Avi. So core is our commitment to the number 4 at the Seder: 4 questions and 4 cups of wine and 4 children and 4 verses at Arami Oved Avi, and we end there. But there's a 5th verse that continues and tells us that not only did God free us from Egyptian slavery, but also God, v'havienu el hamakom, that God brought me to this place. And in Deuteronomy 26, this is what the triumphant, rejoicing pilgrim would say with his first fruits in Yerushalayim. And that verse is left out of the Seder, but that 5th verse maybe becomes the 5th cup, the cup of Eliyahu, the cup of redemption, where we imagine and yearn for that return to Yerushalayim, the ability to speak of Vivienu, that God has brought us to this place, that sense of completion. That sense of completion is not at the Seder. The Seder is about hope. It's not about complacency, and it's not about full satisfaction. It's really the rejoicing and the gratitude for past redemption as a model for the potential for the future. But the Torah continues. Actually, there's actually another verse in Deuteronomy. It doesn't end even with being brought to Eretz Yisrael. I've brought my first fruits here, and then the Torah tells us, you shall rejoice with all the good that God has given you, and with your household, also in the Levi and the Ger who is with you, as well as the Levite who doesn't have his own fields to harvest, and the stranger who's in your midst. And so that's where the parasha ends. That's where there's a gap in the Torah scroll. When the Mishnah tells us to be Doresh, all the verses, somehow our Seder leaves out all of those verses. We have the first 4 verses that we are Doresh, that we explicate to tell the story. The 5th verse then becomes the the cup of wine of Eliyahu, where we yearn for the future, where we return to Yerushalayim. And then the final verses of the parasha, where we read about rejoicing with the stranger in our midst and along with our household. Well, that the way that's not darshan through words, that is darshan that is explicated and demonstrated through our actions. That we make space for others at our seder. That we don't whenever possible, eat alone, but we eat with others and with our families, with friends, and we always try to find room for just squeeze one extra person at our Seder table who needs a place to celebrate, which brings us back to that very beginning, that halach ma'anya, where we in Babylonian exile in a foreign land, we say no, we can still invite others to come and eat with us. Anybody who needs to celebrate Pesach together with us, because hashtahacha, we're not fully redeemed, but we can look forward to that redemption. And that final stage of redemption, as it exists in the Torah, is the ability to share our joy with others. That's what a Jewish celebration is. That's the Torah's version of celebrating a holiday. We make room at our table for others. We share our good fortune with others and eat with them and rejoice with them. That's how the Seder begins, and that's how we demonstrate as well. In the tables that we sit around and the people we make room for and the food that we cook for them, so that everyone can celebrate together to make it an authentic Jewish celebration. The Shabbat is the Shabbat HaGadol, the Shabbat prior to Pesach. I look forward to joining many of you in Shul for Shabbat. And for those of you I don't see, I wish you all a Chag Kasher Sameach, a joyous Pesach to you and to all of your families.